Hello and welcome to Proof Text and Glow's House TV. I'm Michael Halcomb, and today I have the great privilege of talking with Dr. Jon Weatherly. Really been looking forward to this one. John, it's been a little while since I've seen you in person.
Yeah.
We've crossed paths a few times over the years, and I keep
Mhm.
up with you. Follow you on Facebook.
Okay.
Always, I love following you. You're one of the few people who inject humor into Facebook, so I'm grateful
I
for
there,
that.
there 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 needs to be more. Let's see what we
That's
can do about that.
So I'm really grateful for that. So just a little bit about you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
I'm looking at your LinkedIn because as I was asking, do you have a personal website? This is
Yeah.
some of your information here. You did a couple degrees at Cincinnati Christian University back when that was alive and well.
Back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back in the heyday.
Then you
Yeah.
went to Trinity International University, did an
Mm-hmm.
MDiv there, and
Mm-hmm.
PhD at University of Aberdeen. I almost went there myself.
Oh wow. How about that?
Yeah, and then since then you've taught at Cincinnati Christian University. You were a professor of New Testament, vice president for academic affairs, a dean, and then um, moved on to Johnson University and kind
Mm-hmm.
of similar things, right? Professor of New
Yeah.
Testament, vice president for academic affairs, and the provost and dean of the School of Bible and Theology. But now you're back in an ecclesial setting or
Uh-huh.
ecclesiastical setting, associate pastor or senior pastor or
Associate. Yeah. I'm the number
associate
2 minister
pastor.
man.
All right, associate pastor at Twin City Bible Church in Urbana, Illinois.
Yeah. Right
So I
across the
really
street
want
from the
to.
University of Illinois.
All right, yeah, I want to talk about that. I think that's an
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
thing. So maybe we could start there. You have this long career in academia,
Uh-huh.
and then you shift over to the associate pastor role. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what the shift from academia to church life has been like.
Yeah, and I appreciate your asking that. This was not something that I had imagined doing. I had worked in a church full time for 3 years after I did my MDiv, mostly to get some space out of out of academic work for a little while, but also to get experience because I anticipated teaching in a setting where many of the students I'd be teaching would be pursuing ministry careers, Bible college, seminary, that kind of thing. And that was a good experience. But when those 3 years were over, I was really ready to move on. And when we went to Cincinnati in 1990 as an alumnus, joining the faculty, I just anticipated, like a lot of others, I would spend my entire career there, and either retire there or be taken out
Right.
feet first. We don't need to discuss the reasons, but in 2012, I realized it was important for me to move on. And in that process, received an offer from Johnson University where we went, but I also received a very interesting offer from a church, which we had not anticipated. But my wife and I both realized, hey, this is really intriguing. This is very appealing to us. We're not people who talk about God's call because we don't like the way that's played as a kind of a power card, if you will.
Yeah.
But we honestly, they both institutions gave us the leeway to kind of debate which way to go for a couple of months or more, and we very finally made the decision to go to Johnson. But when we moved there, it was with kind of the consciousness that this may not be the last chapter, and if it's not, there will be the next chapter is going to be a church. So increasing restlessness and then some developments that led me to think, okay, I could finish out here at Johnson, but maybe there is another adventure out there. Well, the middle of a pandemic is a terrible time to look for a position. So we did, but about a year later, I was contacted for an independent reason by a headhunter guy from the Slingshot Group. Wanted my help in finding a children's minister for a church in Overland Park, Kansas, as I recall. And, my response was, man, I don't know any more people, who are available for children's ministry than anyone else, but let me remind you why I'm in your database. And we had really kind of said we had maybe two ways of thinking about where we might go. My wife and I were both tired of being in ethnically homogeneous churches and wanted to be in an ethnically
Mm,
diverse church. And that would mean in North America that I would not be then in a senior position, but the lead pastor should be a person of color. The other alternative was to be in a university town. So I kind of laid that out briefly. And immediate response was, well, I just started working with this church. The new lead pastor has been there about a year and a half. He's African American, good guy, experienced. And the church sits right across the street from the University of Illinois. And I thought, whoa, okay.
mm,
So yeah, so we've been here now for 2 years, and it is thoroughly enjoyable. And I, I've said to people, I'm here for the conversations. I
mm,
have tasks that I do. I implement the small groups ministry. I do some of the preaching, implement discipleship training, Bible teaching, and so forth outside of the worship service. But for me, the main thing that I do is have conversations with people at formative points of their life, um,
mm.
and it's a lot of fun. It's a great thing to be able to do, and
Yeah.
really have enjoyed it, and we feel blessed to be here.
Do you miss the university classroom?
That's an interesting question. I thought I might, and I find that I really don't. I've continued to teach an online class for Johnson. Um, just, for Inside Baseball, that continues to give me access to the online digital
Yeah,
library, which
right,
saves me hundreds
right.
of dollars a year. Um, and online teaching is not the same as in-person teaching. I always enjoy the
Yeah.
give and take of the in-person classroom, but I have lots and lots of in-person give and take now. And to be honest, as I got to 60 years old, I began to sense that it was a little bit harder for me to connect generationally.
Huh.
And so, I am, I would still enjoy that kind of thing if the opportunity presented itself. I don't miss the grading one bit.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
I'm really, really happy not to be embroiled in this moment of everyone in higher ed trying to sort out what's been written by a student and what's been written by a
Mm,
chatbot. Um, I've
right.
dealt with other crises. How are we going to teach in a pandemic? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm happy. I'm happy for others to do that. But yeah, I had a fear that I was kind of an addict to the adrenaline of the classroom, and it turns out that you can get adrenaline from other things. So.
Yeah. Wow. So you said a moment ago, we we're not people who necessarily use the phrase like the call. God's
Hmm.
called us, because that's been used as a trump card. Um, absolutely. So I've thought. So I move in sort of Wesleyan circles where that's
Uh-huh.
a very much used,
Yes, it
and
is.
in a not necessarily an abusive manner. Sometimes it is, but
Hmm.
in a less than couth manner, I would say sometimes. And I often, when I hear people will sort of front that or lead with
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Um, I've often thought about, we're not really. Why do we make so much of where we're called to or what we're called to? Like the primary call is to God Himself.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Um, I got so I don't know. I feel like, yeah. So I don't know. I feel like that's an interesting thing to wrestle with. And um, when did you discern God's leading? Did you discern, like, how would you describe it if not sort of a
Yeah.
call, or what was it? What is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me preface that with an explanation, with
Sure.
a side note that I don't want to lose track of. I'm finding how much the having a call it a out of the mainstream perspective on calling and even God's will
Yeah.
can be when you are giving um, spiritual counsel to very earnest um,
Mm,
undergraduates and graduate students who are thinking about what their next step is going to be. And so to be able to say to them, you've got multiple opportunities here. All of them are honoring God. None of them is going to be the last thing that you ever do, we pray. So, you're free to choose here. Do that
Mm,
prayerfully, do that with a level of self-awareness that um, checks things like ego gratification and so forth that may be motivating you. But don't feel that you have to somehow parse out among these three great opportunities which one is really God's will. God is probably pretty
right,
cool with all of these. Yeah, so I think
right.
that's important. Yeah, in terms of our own sense of being here, I would use less the language of calling and more the language of providence. That God provided for us at this point in our lives, something that has just been a tremendous opportunity for service and a tremendous blessing. Um, on the personal side, when we moved here, our daughter in 2022, our daughter-in-law was just finishing up treatment that had been going on for about 2 years for
Mm,
breast cancer, and looked like she was going to be in the clear. And so, but we discovered, she discovered about um, 2 months after we moved here that cancer had metastasized,
mm,
and ultimately it took her life. Almost, almost to the day a year ago that we are recording
wow,
this. It's actually a year ago tomorrow. And one of the questions that this raised for us is why are we here when we could have been closer to them, to health? And we did a lot of things. My wife, rather than look for a job, took retirement and spent a lot of time there along with our daughter-in-law's mother and her family and so forth, just to help out with them. And so it wasn't as if we were unable to be of assistance. And at
mm,
the end of that experience, I just really came to the conclusion out of what we had gone through, that it was good that we are where we are, because the people in this church have been so enormously supportive of us
wow,
in that circumstance. And so I've said to them, if I can say there's a reason God brought us here so you all could take care of us in this crisis.
wow,
And so we're really, really grateful for that.
wow. That's amazing to hear. Incredible. So you plan on staying in sort of full-time ministry going forward? Is
Well, yeah, because when you're 65 years old, it's not like you should be thinking about the next job. Uh, if you wrap up this one, it's probably time to just step back, right? You know, get the seniors coffee at McDonald's and
there
check
you
out
go.
some DVDs at the library, and pull your pants up over your belly and spend the afternoons complaining about the government.
There you go.
Yeah,
Hmm. Well, speaking of government, we're in an interesting time, aren't
yeah.
we? And our culture. I don't know. You've been around a little bit longer than me, but um, you know, I feel like our culture right now has a level of obsession with politics
Mm,
that that seems unmatched as far as like I can remember. Maybe that's just my own sort of misreading of the culture, but um, I'm seeing Christians,
hmm
uh, especially even just in the last week with the Trump verdict. Guilty. He was found
yeah,
guilty, and I've seen memes floating around on Facebook like I I stood with a crucified an un or how is it something like I stood with a savior who was on an unfailed arrested unfairly and on an unfair trial, and I'll stand with Trump or something to that effect, right? Like
yeah,
these
yeah,
like
yeah.
Trump Jesus comparisons, um, and I'm wondering what it's like in your ministry contexts. Are are politics a big deal? Have
Mm.
they seeped in? Are you feeling that tension in the local church where you're at?
No, that's
Um,
that's that's a good question. First of all, let's just put this out there. Um, I had been thinking about my future at Johnson for a while when we decided to look. But the specific thing that precipitated it was that there was a group of donors who threatened to withdraw their support to the university if I did not resign as provost there because of my political views, which I had
Mm,
expressed freely. And so that was certainly nothing that the was anticipated when I was hired there, or when the president at the time asked me to be provost. Because everyone knew, kind of who I
right.
was. And it's not like I'm some kind of political radical. I'm just interested in politics because I love my neighbor, and or at least that's what I think. And so, in when I was offered the position, I said, I've been pretty open about my opposition to Mr. Trump. Is that going to be a problem? The provost position, and the answer was, well, no, that won't be a problem. Well, it was a problem,
Mm,
and so that was there. The atmosphere in this town is different, and I think it's because the church that I'm in has such ethnic diversity, economic diversity, diversity of education. It's predominantly, I mean, I make the joke all the time. This is the nerd church. We have faculty members, we have university staff, we have a large number of campus ministry personnel. About half of our attendance during the 40 to 50% of our attendance during the academic year is students.
mm,
Um, and this is, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, UIUC, is referred to by many of our students as University for Indians, University for Chinese. We have about 8,000 international students here,
wow.
and a lot of international students, people from all over the globe who attend our church. That just changes the outlook on politics. They're not engaged in American partisanship. They don't imagine that the American presidential election is the determinant of the future of life, the universe, and everything. Though they maybe appreciate many of them more than Americans do the impact that American policy has globally.
Right.
So that changes the nature of things. And so no, it has not been a tension, and it's a kind of a luxury to be able to. As we did last fall, I recruited one of our church leaders who is an outstanding professor of political science at the University of Illinois, runs a center that actually studies the transfer of power, and they do computer modeling that classifies things and so forth. And I said to him, Scott, would you lead a class on Christianity and politics? And so he agreed to do that. And we had 2 lawyers who assisted him. So to have those kinds of resources, I realized that not every church can say, well, let's ask one of our several political scientists if they would lead a course. Um, and that has certainly kind of mollified that experience. Another aspect of this is that Illinois is a blue state, but downstate Illinois is red, but Champaign-Urbana is purple.
Mm,
And so there's just kind of a transmogrification of that. This community wouldn't necessarily be predominantly red or blue at this moment, but they also know they have no effect on the Electoral College whatsoever. You
huh.
know, everything's happening upstate in Chicago and the collar counties.
Right.
And if Illinois somehow went red, then the Republicans would be getting 480, electoral votes or something like
Right.
that. So,
Right. So another thing so you have this one extreme where folks will look at Trump as like a, a savior figure.
yeah,
And again,
yeah,
I've been seeing that in these posts that have been floating around since the guilty verdict. And full disclosure, I voted for Trump
good,
previously. More of a vote against the other party than a vote
sure,
for Trump. But I also see the other end of the spectrum where we'll hear things like Jesus wasn't political, you know, and I have
yeah,
to have to like sort of like grimace or wince at that, because certainly Jesus, everything Jesus said and did had had a
Absolutely.
had a political edge to it.
That's right.
Not that he was trying to, like overtake political parties or sway political parties, but there was nothing he really said or did that, yeah, didn't have this political edge to it.
Right.
Um, yeah, so I'm wondering, as a pastor, as a New Testament scholar, as a Bible scholar,
Hmm.
and we're heading into another crazy election season.
Hmm.
Um, what do you say to somebody who takes that kind of stand or the other kind of stand?
Well, let's talk about Jesus. That sounds like the best
Yeah.
aspect of this to talk about. Yeah, yeah, I appreciate the way you put it. Everything, I can't think of anything that Jesus said that doesn't connect to politics the way that we use the term. If we start with the phrase "the kingdom of God," that's a political statement.
Yes.
Now, it is also a statement that transcends politics, but there, to a certain extent, and now I'm getting into some historical theology here. We really need to think past the Reformation idea of kind of the two magisteria, the authority of the church and the authority of the state. You really sense that that was something that kind of worked out in Europe as a way first to affirm the role of the Church of Rome in kind of overseeing all of Europe to the degree that that was ever a reality. But then, as papal authority is thrown over, the Protestants were trying to assert how it was that they weren't anarchists,
Mm,
and these kinds of things come up. The reality is that following Christ transforms everything that we do.
yes.
If we're listening to what the way Paul applies the gospel in Philippians 2:4, don't look out for your own interests, look out for other people's interests. Well, as they say, that changes everything. And maybe a second recognition is that there was no such thing as representative democracy in the world of the New Testament. Being politically active wasn't something that ordinary people did or could do. They had no influence over the government whatsoever, unless they took up arms, in which case they'd mostly have influence in being killed.
Right.
And I like the way N.T. Wright has put this. If we render under Caesar that which is Caesar's, we need to recognize in a representative democracy, I am Caesar. That I
Mm,
participate with other citizens in this democracy to decide what is and isn't going to get done. And so that isn't simply deference to elected authorities, but that is a recognition that human power is subservient to the authority of God and the authority of Christ. So, in all of those respects, if I'm saying Jesus wasn't political, well, no, Jesus is neither a Republican or a Democrat. The argument about whether Jesus was a progressive or a conservative is completely anachronistic. Quite frankly,
mhm.
those categories probably don't even work, earlier than 19 or 1895 or something, historically. I suppose you could, someone would make the argument for 19th century. Anyway, we can leave that aside. Marx is earlier than that, I suppose. The uh, we need to reckon with that idea. Now, the way that I try to encourage people to think about this is that instead of asking ourselves which of my two major party choices does the gospel direct me to support, we should think about this more as what's my best judgment as to how I can use my vote, my influence for the good of other people. And that might suggest to some people, oh, you're saying to vote left so that there's more of a public welfare state, et cetera. Well, there may be a long-term macroeconomic effect to that isn't good for the poor or anyone else. And so we need to be discerning. We need to be realistic, and at the same time understand that the limits of our own knowledge and our own self-awareness are going to apply here. The power that we have to deceive ourselves to imagining that our conclusions are godly conclusions, when in fact they're conclusions that just prop up our own image of ourselves. That's
Virtue
something.
signaling.
Yeah, virtue signaling, or not even signaling, just being the person that I think that I am. I think that I'm a good person. I think I'm a godly person, and I've always associated that with this political platform or this political label. And so by following that political label, I'm doing the things that I do. Um, Having studied abroad back in the day was interesting because we lived in Britain in Margaret Thatcher's prime ministership, and that was very controversial, especially where we lived in Scotland, where she had very little popularity. And to realize most British evangelical Christians were not members of the Tory party was, oh, how about that? Things are different here. There's a different perception of these dynamics and so forth. And so, that doesn't mean I thought, oh, I should join them, but it helped me understand um, the limits of my own discernment, if you want to use that term.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So I do full-time uh pastorate work as well at the moment,
Hmm.
and um I was doing this 4 years ago as we were heading into that election season, and it
Yeah,
was we had the pandemic going on and George Floyd, and it
yeah.
was uh, at that time, uh, being a pastor, and getting in the pulpit on any Sunday, it was like it was like a ready-made explosion, right?
Hmm.
Because anything that you said was filtered through the election and the pandemic and George
Yeah.
Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and there was really nothing you could say almost at the time that didn't have the potential to be utterly explosive.
Hmm.
Uh, it seems a little less this time as
Yeah.
we head into this election, but we still have several months, and I have a hunch that heading into November, and
Yeah.
it's
That's a really optimistic way to put it. We have several months for things to get a lot worse. And I think you're right. I think you're right.
yeah,
I have said all along, and I try to hold to this, that my concern about this political moment for Americans, and it's maybe worth mentioning this whole kind of nationalist authoritarian thing is a global phenomenon right now. You can look at Hungary, you can look at Brazil, obviously you can look at Russia. In Germany, where they know more about the toxic far right than anyone, where they have many of the strictest laws that really shut down what Americans would think of as free speech regarding the far right, the proto-Nazi or quasi-Nazi right. The Alliance für Deutschland, which is the far right party, has received the second largest number of votes in the most recent election. Now, because
wow,
of the multiple parties they have, that was 16%. It isn't as if 47% or even 39% are voting that way. But suddenly this party is in the mainstream, and it's not unthinkable that at some point in the near future they might find themselves in a coalition government in the very country that has demonstrated, where all this can go. So,
exactly.
we're in this global moment, but the thing that I have tried to keep the forefront of my own mind and stress to other people is the danger of this moment is the damage it can do to our own souls, in the way that we can become, well, as you said, blasphemers. This equation of Trump with Jesus is, there's no other word for it from a Christian
Right.
point of view. Um, it's the way that we can become completely callous towards other people and lose our ability to act with kindness, with compassion, to listen with empathy. To when we're making no effort to understand people who are different from ourselves, but only to find fault with them, to own them, as people say. we're doing damage to our souls. We're doing, we're working against the transformation that the Spirit is trying to accomplish in us. And I'm not suggesting that this means we become people who are without opinions and, that great line in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" I vote for yours truly. Well, I vote for yours truly too. And then Delbert says, well, I'm with you fellers. Just a completely, kind of inane go along to get along kind of a guy. It's not that we don't have a position. It's not that we don't have opinions, but we exercise them with a level of humility and self-awareness, that we know our limitations. We know that things are not going to work out as we expect, and
Well,
I think that is sadly lost in a moment like this. And it is. I think there's no question it's more intense now. On the other hand, it's not 1861 either.
right, right. Well, you're talking about like this particular moment in uh as a Christian, as a Christian scholar, as a Christian
Mm-hmm.
minister, the issue with the war between Israel and Gaza,
Yeah.
for example. I mean, that is another explosive issue.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen Christian friends post on social media, one hoping, wishing for an end to, the destruction, only to see people reply to them, and level the accusation of them being anti-Semitic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we all should want this war and devastation to end.
Yeah.
Um, but then you see the sort of other side where you have the takeovers of college campuses and highways, and the sort of pro-Palestinian and movement,
Mm-hmm.
pro-Gaza, whatever you want to call it. That is another. It seems to be. It seems to be a parallel to the stuff that was going on with, in a way, the Black Lives Matter movement in the previous election cycle, or leading up to the previous election cycle. So here we have another sort of firestorm, um, heading
Yeah.
into this election cycle, and then you have the transgender issue,
Mm-hmm.
which is always being talked about. It seems like, and what, something I've noticed recently, even a guy like Bill Maher,
Yeah.
who I've followed him for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for decades. I remember when his movie Religulous came out,
Uh-huh.
watched that, and um, now the left are sort of calling him, centrist or even moving right, and he's saying, no, I've stayed in the same place. It's y'all that just moved way left. And
Yeah.
so you have, you talk about the far right, then you have the far left, and these like extremes. Like
Mm-hmm.
it does seem like extreme polarization, at least at a media level. But on the like level, this is what gets me. Like on the level when I like sit down and talk to somebody, like face to face or in person, the extremes seem to evaporate for the most part. Like
Yeah.
in daily life, I'm not encountering those extremes as much. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe I'm naive. Maybe my circles are too small. But I don't know. Like I'm wondering what your response to that. You
Well, I
experiencing
think
something
I
similar?
I agree with everything you said. I'm with you fellers. The uh, on the one hand, this is a highly polarized time, and you see this existing at either end of the spectrum. And let's acknowledge too the very fact that we think that we can put significant political questions on a one-dimensional spectrum and plot them is itself naive, problematic, distorts reality. There's a lot. This is at least three-dimensional. The plotting of all of this stuff.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah. The so I think that's important. Um, there's the question of is this media or is it reality? One of the interesting things about being in a community like this is that it is dominated by our university, but we have other things too, like Kraft macaroni and cheese is put in boxes here in Champaign-Urbana.
Mm.
It's an amazing thing. So there's very much a blend of town and gown. The student Gaza protests kind of came to a head the Friday night here in April, before they were having the first full marathon here that they've had since the pandemic. So this was a kind of a big deal for the town. And the night before, on Friday night, there was supposed to be a 5K, and they had to cancel it because of the protests. Now, interestingly enough, they had to cancel it because of the protests, not because the protesters were interfering with the route of the 5K. Earlier in the week, and a student I meet with regularly complained. He said, "Yeah, I was late to my class because they were blocking the bus terminal on campus, where all the buses came together." Which was, and the university said, "Look, go someplace else where you're not interfering with people." Oh, okay, they did it. And I'm sure U of I, being dominated by engineering students and so forth, that things were not nearly as vociferous as they would be. Someplace like Columbia University, where everyone is majoring in furious political thought. But the reason they had to cancel the 5K was simply they had asked all the available municipal police to gather where the protesters were, because they wanted them cleared away from where they were. They had set up tents, which the university said, and it was against university policy, and they wanted them to move from one spot on campus to another spot on campus. And when they initially did not agree, then they just assembled this police cordon and moved them all away. So they didn't have police to man the intersections and so forth that you need to do when you're running on city streets. And that was it. Nobody's nose was bloodied. I don't know, maybe some birds flew or something, but that was about as far as we got. And meanwhile, the community just goes on as it always does. There's no free Gaza sign at my grocery store or anything like that. And people in the community are speaking about this thoughtfully. No, it's not anti-Semitic to say you don't want Palestinians killed.
Right.
That kind of thing. Of course, there's always the specter of people who assume that the modern state of Israel is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy and plays a key role in God's plan. And that is a very toxic idea that has no grounding in the Bible and needs to be understood and rejected. If I may, I will recommend an article that I wrote about 12 years ago that is on that subject. It's still available online. If listeners want to go to christianstandard.com, just search for my name and Israel, and you should come to a link that'll take you to this article I did. I think was published.
I'll try to put that in the show notes too.
Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes.
And no, I don't discuss that. I don't discuss Romans 11 there because I ran out of space, but you can just read Tom Wright on Romans 11 and figure that one out. So.
I mentioned earlier, one of the things I appreciate about your Facebook account is the injection of sort of humor and comedic relief. Even in the discussion here, I've enjoyed that. As somebody, I don't know if you know this about me, but I've been dabbling in stand-up comedy.
Whoa, dude, that's great stuff.
So I've done a couple of showcases, and I actually have a show coming up in 7 days.
Wow.
A politician here invited me to come to the political fundraiser and do 10 minutes. So I've written
how crazy is that?
Yeah, I've written a set up, and mostly political jokes. Some local flavor and stuff like that for here in Hawaii. But I'm sort of enamored with humor and comedy.
Yeah.
I've read a lot about humor theory and these sorts of things, and really tried to study that and understand it, and joke structure and all of this stuff. It's week in and week out, I'm writing a sermon. I'm teaching in I'm doing adjunct work at the moment, like in a university setting. writing articles, writing books. But when it comes to writing an original joke, right,
Oh man,
you're sort of flexing or working a different muscle there.
I guess.
And takes it's just a different skill than all those other sorts of like writing. But the one of the things that I've really come to realize is how similar the task of the preacher
Hmm.
and the comedian is. And others have sort of touched on this to other comedians and whatnot, but I've for a while I've thought about the the idea that comedians and preachers are kind of like two of the last frontiers of truth telling in our society.
Well, I hope so. At least I
Yeah,
hope that there's still some truth telling going on. You probably have heard John Mulvaney's line. Of course, he's a lapsed Catholic, and he says, and then we
yeah,
come to the part in the Mass known as the homily, where the priest gives a book report, which is also stand-up comedy. Uh,
yes,
so
right,
my daughter told me about that, and
yeah,
just it cracked us both up.
book
Yeah,
report,
no, I think so. And I think I don't know. I think if you're interested in ideas, if you're interested in communication, you naturally gravitate towards humor.
mm,
And so and then I appreciate your commenting on my Facebook. Uh, I put things on Facebook because I enjoy them, and I'm just kind of sharing my enjoyment with other
right,
people. And I'm not. I'm sometimes I'm trying to make a point. Most of the time, I'm just trying to share something that I enjoy, and I hope other people enjoy as well.
right,
And yeah, and I enjoy the truth. I enjoy the
yes,
gospel. It brings meaning and purpose and resilience and joy to my life. And so, all of this kind of gets bundled together in this way. And I think we're
mm,
maybe at our most human when we just acknowledge all of these things and embrace them.
yeah. I I love that, and I think there's something deeply human about
Yeah.
laughing and
Yeah, there is.
laughing. Right?
Right.
Um, and I don't know, like just from a pastoral or a Christian standpoint, I think what we really need heading into this election cycle is just to be able to laugh.
Yeah.
Just
Well, if
this,
people would take themselves less seriously all the way around, it would help a great, great
yeah,
deal. Yeah. And at the
yeah,
same time, I say that, I would want to say the legacy of representative democracy is fragile,
yes,
and it is much easier to demolish than it is to build, especially when you look at, I mean, it's easy for us to imagine, oh, in 1782, when Washington was elected president, everybody cast their ballot for George Washington. No, there were 13 state
right.
elections of the Electoral College, and not even all of them were held by popular election.
Mm,
In many cases, the state legislature just said, "Here's our slate of electors," and it
mm,
was as if everybody just knew we're going to elect this Washington guy. So when you move from there to just the expansion of the voting franchise, from white landowning men to white
mm,
men to white men and men of color to women, and then you actually affirm the uh, the the post Civil War amendments with the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, and continue to struggle over that, and so forth and so on. And that's just one aspect of this. The institutions that uphold these kinds of things, the thousands of people who work at their government jobs, irrespective of which party is controlling matters and so forth. It's easy to take for granted that these things are omnipresent, that they are resilient, that they will endure any kind of change of administration. I don't know that we want to put that hypothesis to the test,
mm,
because if we're wrong, it's going to take a long time to get back. And this is not a perfect situation, but if we ask ourselves again, as Christians who again, I'll use Philippians 2:4 here, who are seeking to put others' interests before our own. Is it more important that my view of what is right public policy be enforced, even if it's something which is as understandably serious as should minors be encouraged to undergo medical treatment and surgery to change their gender identity? Okay. I don't want to suggest for a minute that I think that that's not a serious question. Do we think that our view of what is most important by that, even when we believe that our view is very much in accord with God's view, do we believe that so much that we are willing to say to other people, you have no say in what happens here?
Mm.
You do not have a place at the table in this society. Is that really working towards others' interests? Is that really loving our neighbor and loving our enemy? Especially when I take a step back and say, even some of my most confident conclusions should be subject to question, to humility. Uh, I may be wrong,
Mm.
or not necessarily wrong, but I may be overlooking some other factor, assuming something falsely about that conclusion that I've drawn that leads me to a policy prescription which is ineffective, inappropriate, dangerous, something of that nature, and certainly not of the value that says other people's rights as established in a pluralistic democracy should be set aside for the sake of fixing this thing.
I wonder, as a Christian scholar, as a pastor, um, what in an ideal sort of scenario, like if
Mm-hmm.
everything could go the way you would hope it would go, like what behavior would you hope to see? You've talked about loving, caring and loving for others, but what behavior would you hope to see out of Christians over the next few months? And I'll pause that and say, I before we started recording,
Mm-hmm.
I made the statement. I used to send questions to people ahead of time, and now I just hit record and see where it goes. So like,
Uh-huh.
I had no idea the question was gonna or the conversation was gonna go this direction
Yeah,
at all. But
yeah.
it's been brilliant. I had no idea we'd spend this much time talking like about politics, but I
Mm.
I love that, and so I'm wondering like what behavior would you hope to see out of like your people, your congregation
Well,
over the
fundamentally, yeah, I would describe it as humility, and understanding humility as the attitude which puts oneself in the lowly position where we do not seek to assert our own rights or our own interests, but we pursue the interests of others. So, in the Venn diagram of humility and love, in the New Testament, there's a ton of overlap, and then just
Mm,
all kinds of things flow out of that. So that means then, as a citizen, overlay the idea of citizenship in a democratic republic on that, and that means, well, I'm going to exercise my franchise. I'm going to do it thoughtfully. I'm going to do it in an informed way, but I'm going to do it in a way that is not condemning of other people. Um, it may be honest about the foibles that I see, the flaws that I see. I
mhm,
would want to be honest, for example, about the way that I think people have, um, given the phenomenon of Trump, they have shifted their views of various policies because someone that they wanted to support under the heading of their political tribe was taking a different position. I mean, Trump could not be more different from Ronald Reagan and the
right.
Bushes regarding trade and immigration, for example. Um, the um, uh, I would want to be honest about this kind of macro criticism of the left that the policies of the left are obsessed with sexual liberty, for example, and so we can. I think we should be able to speak frankly about those kinds of things, but avoid the personal rancor and acknowledge the importance of consensus building and of compromise. Compromise is not a dirty word,
Mm.
and should not be. The fact that a politician has compromised to get part of his agenda, brought into law should not be seen as something that is a negative. But again, this kind of comes back to who am I becoming and how am I treating other people as a result of my political convictions. If I find it easy to refer to other people as human scum, then I've gone astray. If I make jokes about you know what do you call what do you call 1,000 MAGA people at the bottom of the ocean? A good start.
Right.
That used to be a lawyer joke, by the way.
Lawyers.
Um, I need to ask myself, what have I become?
Mm.
What is it that gives me permission to act in this way? Uh, you know, if I am persuaded that there are too many immigrants in the United States, I am not persuaded of that in the least. But if I am somehow persuaded of that, does that justify a policy of cruelty in order to prevent more immigration, for example? All of those kinds of questions are things that I need to be asking myself thoughtfully and critically. Not having really spent much time in the world of theology proper, with my training in biblical scholarship and so forth, I've come late to the table in reading Reinhold Niebuhr, who's
Mm.
an American theologian of the really became prominent from the 1920s and remained so until he died in the 1970s. And Niebuhr is often referred to as the great theologian of the Cold War. Probably, if anyone who is listening to this is in a pastoral position, professionally or otherwise, and you have people in your care or under your influence who are politically active and who want to think carefully about being a Christian and being engaged in politics, you can do a lot worse than to recommend that they read Reinhold Niebuhr. And the Library of America has given us a very nice volume edited by his daughter, who is a scholar in her own right, of his major writings on politics, which is really handy for this. One of the things that Niebuhr talks about is the uneasy conscience. He says Christianity yields an uneasy conscience, which is surprising when we think, well, with absolution of sin and ongoing sanctification, it seems to me we should all have clear consciences. Well, that's not what he means. What he means is that as a Christian, you are constantly aware of your ongoing struggle with sinfulness and the problem that you have of your own finitude, your lack of knowledge of the world, and even your lack of knowledge of yourself. And so you always are in a position where you have to make a decision. You can't step away. You have power, and choosing not to exercise it is a way of exercising that power, which is completely random and ignorant. So we reach the best conclusions that we can. We make the best decisions that we can, but we do them uneasily, not with a zealot's confidence, as it were. And if that sounds to people like it's lukewarm, I think they've missed the point. It's not being lukewarm about Jesus at all. That's affirming Jesus is Lord in ways that my political conscience is not. And so I will stand before him and discover all the things I didn't know, and all the ways that I was engaged in self-deception, as I was trying to prop up my conscience with a kind of overconfidence about any of this.
Wow, that's a good word. Appreciate that. Man, thanks for having this conversation. Again, I had no idea this is where it was going to go. So this is such a
It's
privilege.
the Choose Your Own Adventure podcast. I like that.
That's right. Just a real privilege, a real treat. Good to sit with another scholar and
Yeah.
a pastor and hear, like what's going on in your ministry and how how you were going to get through these next several months and
Yeah.
what you would love to see from other believers. And I think that word humility is a great word. I would say, yeah, I think when you foster that sense of humility, that's a big part of what's going to allow you to be able to laugh.
Yeah, it
Uh,
is,
yeah,
including it yourself.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I hope to see more of that this time around. Than all of than sort of gnashing and lashing out at each other. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um, man, John, I appreciate you.
Thank you,
I
Michael. It's just I'm glad you're doing this thing.
Yeah,
Uh, appreciate the investment in the church that this represents.
absolutely. So you all check out. I'll try to include in the show notes here the article that Dr. Willie was talking about, and um, yeah, check out check out the Proof Text podcast, Gloss House TV channel, glowshouse.com, all that good stuff. Tons of great resources on there, and interviews with other great thinkers, just like Dr. Weatherly here. So, John, it's good to see you, brother. Blessings to you and your family. Blessings on your
Thank you.
ministry, and
Thank you. Likewise.
continued
Likewise.
scholarship. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching and listening. We're going to stop here and say we hope that helps.